The banquet hall lights reflected off the polished silverware as Shelley, mid-sentence, reached across the table and swiped my half-eaten dessert plate away. "You don't need that, Frank," she announced, her voice echoing slightly in the sudden quiet. My stomach clenched, exposed. Her clients chuckled, a low, collective sound. "Wouldn't want you getting soft now, would we?" she added. Her smile sharp, not quite reaching her eyes. The Seattle autumn air bit at my cheeks as I sprinted, the bus an impatient behemoth pulling away from the curb. My satchel swung against my hip. I reached the stop just as the hydraulic sigh announced its departure, my chest heaving. A woman already seated, sharp and tailored, looked up from her phone. She offered a small, knowing smirk. "Barely," she said, her voice clear above the bus's rumble. "You might want to invest in an alarm clock." I slid into the seat across from her, trying to catch my breath. Frank, a librarian in my early 30s, was usually more punctual. My quiet routine, the predictable rhythm of Dewey Decimal and overdue notices, rarely involved such last-minute scrambles. But the clock had simply slipped away that morning. She wore a charcoal suit, the fabric crisp, a silver watch gleaming at her wrist. Her hair was pulled back tight, revealing sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed to take everything in. Shelley, I learned later, was her name. A corporate lawyer. Her confidence was a palpable thing, radiating from her like heat. It was this self-possession that instantly drew me in, making her dismissive comment feel more like an observation than a slight. I found myself smitten, overlooking the subtle edge in her voice, choosing instead to see it as efficiency. Our first date, a week later, was in a noisy, trendy cafe downtown, the kind of place with exposed brick and small plates. Shelley took charge immediately. She ordered for both of us without much consultation, turning to me with a quick, "You like salmon, right, Frank?" "Medium rare." I nodded, a little surprised, a little flattered by her decisiveness. The conversation moved at her pace, brisk and intelligent, touching on market trends and international law. I found myself mostly listening, offering quiet affirmations. 6 months later, at a luxurious resort on the Oregon coast, the proposal felt less like a question and more like a pronouncement. We were by the infinity pool, the Pacific Ocean, a distant, muted roar. Shelley turned from the view, a diamond glinting in her hand. "You're comfortable, Frank," she stated, not asking. "And reliable. I need reliability." She slipped the ring onto my finger. It was a substantial rock, almost heavy. I didn't say much then, just nodded, the sun warm on my neck. My mother called a few days later, her voice thin with concern. "Shelley seems very driven, Frank. Does she make you happy?" she asked, a pause hanging in the air. I reassured her, telling her Shelley was exactly what I needed. But the question lingered, a quiet hum in the back of my mind. The wedding, 3 months after that, was a lavish affair. Shelley orchestrated every detail. It was held in a renovated historic mansion, the guest list filled with her clients and colleagues. The flowers alone must have cost more than my first car. I wore a rented tuxedo that felt stiff and alien. Shelley moved through the crowd, a queen holding court, laughing loudly at jokes I didn't quite understand. I felt a growing unease, the weight of the projected debt pressing down. But I pushed it aside, telling myself it was an investment in our future, a necessary step for the life Shelley envisioned. Not long after, Shelley suggested I leave the library. "You're writing, Frank," she'd said over breakfast, stirring her coffee. "It needs your full attention. The library is quaint, but a distraction. My fantasy novels, the dragons and wizards that filled my notebooks, were a quiet passion." I hesitated, the thought of leaving my stable job, my familiar world, a cold wave. But Shelley was insistent, her arguments logical and persuasive. She offered to cover our expenses, her salary more than enough. So I quit, trading the hushed stacks for the echoing silence of our large, modern house. The house felt bigger without the hum of the office, the rustle of turning pages. I set up my desk, ready to dive into my stories. But Shelley's encouragement had its limits. Fantasy? She scoffed a week later, picking up one of my drafts. Really, Frank? Dragons and wizards? You should try legal thrillers. You could research my cases, think about the market. Her words were delivered with a casual finality, a gentle redirection that felt like a sharp jab. My dragons and wizards retreated into the shadows. I learned to nod, to smile, to offer non-committal answers, then return to my stories only when Shelley was safely out of the house, battling her own dragons in courtrooms downtown. Our social life shifted, slowly but surely, to revolve entirely around Shelley's corporate orbit. There were client dinners in private rooms, industry galas in converted warehouses, and weekend retreats at upscale lodges. I became a fixture at her side. The quiet, supportive husband. I learned to smile on cue, to nod at appropriate pauses, and to offer bland, agreeable comments when directly addressed. My job was to be present, to look content, and to reflect well on Shelley. I tried to do it without complaint. It was at these gatherings that the jokes started, subtle at first, easily dismissed. Then they grew bolder, more direct, always delivered with Shelley's bright, disarming smile. One evening, at a dinner party in a downtown high-rise apartment, she was holding court with a group of her senior partners. The conversation turned to a recent vacation we'd taken to the Caribbean. "Oh, and Frank got the most awful sunburn," she began, her laugh light and melodious. "He spent half the trip looking like a lobster. You should have seen him, bright red from head to toe." My face flushed, a familiar heat rising to my ears. I felt myself shrink, becoming smaller in my chair. The partners chuckled politely, glancing my way, a flicker of amusement in their eyes. I offered a weak smile, my gaze fixed on my half-eaten salad. It felt like I was a pet being shown off, a novelty piece in her carefully curated life. My opinion on the trip, on anything, was irrelevant. This wasn't about sharing a funny anecdote. It was about establishing a dynamic, a pecking order, within her professional circle. Later that week, after one such party had ended and Shelley was unwinding with a glass of wine, I finally found a sliver of courage. "Shelley," I began, my voice softer than I intended, "could you maybe not make those jokes about me? At the parties, I mean." She raised an eyebrow, taking a slow sip. "What jokes, honey? The ones about my sunburn, or the time I got lost at the mall? Things like that. They make me feel small." She put her wine glass down with a soft clink. "Oh, Frank, I'm just teasing. Everyone knows it's all good fun. It's just light-hearted banter. You're not going to be one of those oversensitive men, are you?" Her tone was gentle, almost chiding. But the question carried the weight of a warning. It implied a weakness, a failing on my part, for even bringing it up. My complaint was not valid. My reaction was the problem. I mumbled an apology. The moment evaporating. This pattern became our new normal. Public humiliation, wrapped in a veneer of affectionate teasing, followed by a private dismissal of my feelings. It chipped away at me. A slow, relentless erosion. Sometimes the barbs weren't even veiled. We'd be watching television, a quiet evening, and she'd turn to me, her voice sharp. "God. Frank, do you have to breathe so loudly? It's like a forge in here." My breath, my very presence, became a source of irritation. I retreated further into my writing. The world of dragons and wizards, which Shelley still openly disdained, became my sanctuary. There, my characters were brave, my words had power. In those stories, I was the hero, and my opinions mattered. I could build empires and solve ancient riddles, all from the quiet corner of my study. It was a world I controlled, a world where Shelley had no sway. Meanwhile, Shelley's career soared. Her name appeared in legal journals, her cases made headlines. More money poured in, funding a life of escalating luxury and demanding commitments. But with the prestige came more stress, a constant, tightly wound tension that vibrated just beneath her polished surface. The cracks in our marriage widened, subtle at first, then more pronounced, like fault lines beneath a grand facade. I tried to paper over them with smiles and acquiescence, telling myself, As my mother always used to say, that relationships take work. I just needed to work harder, to be more understanding, to be less me. Years drifted by, each one a little heavier than the last. I moved through our meticulously designed house, through Shelley's life, feeling increasingly like a ghost. My writing, once a vibrant escape, became a refuge for my diminishing self. At Shelley's dinner parties, I continued my role as the silent, agreeable accessory. Though the effort to maintain the facade grew more taxing, one crisp autumn evening, with the scent of pine and expensive food filling the air of our dining room, I heard my name. Shelley, elegant in a sapphire dress, was regaling her guests with an anecdote. Her voice, usually so controlled, carried a note of theatrical amusement. She was talking about a difficult corporate case, one she'd brought home, the documents spilling across the dining table. I had, in my quiet way, tried to help, reading through some of the briefs, asking questions, trying to connect. And Frank, she said, pausing for effect. Bless his heart. He wanted to help. You should have seen him, stumbling over the legal jargon like a dog trying to recite Shakespeare, asking me if tort was a type of dessert. The room erupted. Laughter, sharp and sudden, bounced off the high ceilings. It wasn't the polite chuckle I'd become accustomed to. This was full, unrestrained amusement at my expense. My face burned, a deep, painful blush spreading across my cheeks. I felt a familiar shrinkage, a contraction in my chest. I stared at my plate, watching the reflection of the chandelier shimmer on the surface of my wine. It was a new depth of humiliation. Shelley didn't stop there. She thrived on the laughter, her smile widening. I swear, she continued, her voice light. Sometimes I think I'm married to a golden retriever instead of a man. Not the brightest bulb, but loyal to a fault. Isn't that right, Frank? She turned to me then, her eyes sparkling with mirth, expecting my usual weak smile, my silent acknowledgement of the joke. But something snapped. A profound, silent rage ignited within me. It was cold, not hot, a clear, sharp blade slicing through years of hurt and self-pity. This wasn't merely condescension. It was a public declaration of my utter insignificance, stripped bare for her entertainment. Later that night, the house was dark and quiet. Shelley had gone to bed, leaving her phone charging on the kitchen counter. I walked past it, heading for a glass of water, when the screen lit up, a notification. A text message. My eyes, almost against my will, caught the words, "Can't wait to see you, Mitch." Last night was incredible. My world, the one I had meticulously constructed around Shelley, around her power and her disdain, began to unravel. The image of my perfect, powerful wife, the woman who commanded courtrooms and boardrooms, shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. I picked up the phone, my fingers trembling. The text was from a number I didn't recognize. Mitch. Last night. Incredible. A desperate attempt at rationalization bubbled up. It had to be a colleague, a business trip. A casual, innocent text, but the words, "Last night was incredible," echoed in the quiet kitchen, refusing to be innocent. The cold rage from earlier now mixed with a sickening nausea. This was not the kind of work my mother had spoken of. This was a betrayal, a brutal, undeniable fact. The next morning, Shelley moved through her usual precise routine. Coffee, news, briefcase. She kissed my cheek, a brief, dry touch, before heading out the door. "Big day, Frank," she said, her voice brisk. "Don't forget to call the gardener." She was oblivious, or so I thought. I watched the taillights of her car disappear down the drive, a new emptiness settling in the pit of my stomach, mixed with that cold, clear determination. The doormat was about to grow a backbone. The house, once a cage of quiet despair, now felt like an empty tomb. A knot formed in my stomach, tightening with each passing minute. I began to search, not for something specific, just for an answer, for confirmation of the sickening dread that had taken root. I looked in her usual spots, the bedside drawer, her purse, the hidden compartment in her briefcase. Nothing. Then, almost by chance, tucked away in an old jewelry box at the back of her closet, beneath layers of silk scarves, I found it. A slim, unfamiliar phone. My fingers trembled as I pressed the power button. It opened without a password, and there it was. Months, maybe years, of emails, photos, messages, a digital diary of a life I knew nothing about. Shelley and Mitch. The texts were explicit, detailing secret rendezvous at hotels downtown, romantic getaways to small towns along the coast, weekends away that she'd explained away as client retreats. Each message was a fresh wound, a brutal confirmation of her deception. My breathing grew shallow, the air in the room suddenly thick. Then I saw it. A photo. Mitch, his arm casually around Shelley's waist, both of them smiling, standing in front of the rustic stone fireplace at the Cascades Resort, the very same place where she had proposed to me, where she had called me comfortable and reliable, the same place where I had, in my naivete, felt a flicker of hope for our future. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth, cold and metallic. Grief, raw and sharp, turned quickly to a hard, unyielding anger. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a calculated, sustained betrayal. My mind, usually a quiet, contemplative space, became sharp and focused. I found our old inkjet printer, dusted it off, and began to print. Every email, every text, every incriminating photo. Page after page, the stack grew. A tangible record of her deceit. The mechanical whir of the printer was the only sound in the silent house. Shelley returned late that afternoon, her usual brisk efficiency radiating from her as she walked through the door. She dropped her briefcase on the marble foyer, shedding her jacket. She started to say something about her day, but I cut her off. My voice was calm, steady, alien even to my own ears. "Who is Mitch?" Shelley, her face, usually so composed, dropped for a fraction of a second. A flicker of surprise, then something colder, more calculating, took its place. Her mask of indifference slid back into position. "He's just a colleague, Frank, a senior partner on the new merger." "Why?" Her eyes narrowed, searching mine for weakness. I walked to the dining room table, where the stack of papers sat, stark white against the polished wood. I placed my hand on them, a small, definitive gesture. "Don't lie to me, Shelley," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but it carried an unexpected weight. "I know everything." She looked at the stack, her gaze sweeping over the printed pages, then back to my face. The indifference, for a moment, wavered. A muscle in her jaw twitched. Then, with a sigh that sounded almost bored, she gave her cold admission. "Fine. Yes, I'm having an affair. It's been going on for a while." She shrugged, as if discussing the weather. "He's more exciting than you, Frank. You're comfortable, reliable. Mitch is exciting." The words hung in the air, a final, brutal confirmation. The full extent of her deception, her utter disdain, settled over me with a chilling clarity. It wasn't just the affair. It was her complete lack of remorse, her casual cruelty. She had never seen me as a partner, only a placeholder, a convenience. "I want a divorce," I said, the words feeling heavy, real, as they left my lips. She stared at me, a mirthless laugh escaping her. "Don't be ridiculous, Frank," she sneered, picking up her briefcase. "We'll work through this." Shelley, now stripped of her pretense, launched into action with a chilling efficiency. Her earlier dismissal of my divorce request was merely a prelude. "I'm divorcing you, Frank," she announced a day later, her voice devoid of emotion as she stood in the living room, a briefcase in hand. "And I will make sure you get nothing. Not a dime." She delivered the threat with the same casual authority she'd used to close a major deal. What followed was a swift, brutal dismantling of my life. The joint bank accounts, which had always been largely her money, were frozen overnight. My credit cards, linked to those accounts, were canceled without warning. I stood at a grocery store checkout, card declined, and the cashier's pitying glance felt like another shard of humiliation. I walked home with an empty basket. Then came the restraining order. A delivery man, looking uncomfortable, handed me the legal papers. Shelley had claimed harassment, a vague accusation designed to remove me quickly and cleanly. I had 24 hours to vacate. Just like that, I was evicted from the house I'd called home. The house where I'd spent years attempting to forge a life with her. I packed a single suitcase. A few changes of clothes, my worn copy of The Lord of the Rings, my laptop. That was all I could manage to gather before the deadline. I found a tiny, run-down apartment on the edge of the city, a place with thin walls and the faint smell of stale cigarette smoke, a stark contrast to the gleaming marble and high ceilings I'd left behind. The silence there was heavy, unbroken by anything but the distant city hum. The cruelest blow, however, wasn't the money or the house. It was Scout. My golden retriever. He's happier with me anyway, Shelley had said, her voice dismissive, when I'd asked about him. A big yard. Scout, my loyal companion, the only creature in that house who had offered unconditional affection, was gone. That particular pain was a dull ache that settled deep in my chest, a constant reminder of what I'd lost. I sank into a depression unlike anything I'd ever known. The days blurred. The laptop sat unopened. My fantasy worlds, once a vibrant escape, now felt hollow, meaningless. How could I write about heroes and quests when my own life was a pathetic heap of shattered trust and betrayal? The betrayal wasn't just the affair, it was the casual cruelty, the effortless way she'd dismantled me. My mother called, her voice strained. "Frank, honey, are you eating?" Friends from my old library job reached out, offering coffee, a listening ear. Their words, though well-intentioned, felt distant, like echoes through a long tunnel. I nodded, mumbled vague reassurances, but their world felt far removed from my own desolate landscape. One morning, staring at the peeling paint of my apartment ceiling, a flicker of something new ignited. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was a cold resolve, born from the pain of losing Scout. I had to fight back. If not for myself, then for him. I owed him that much. The doormat had been kicked for too long. I found a lawyer through an online search, a man named Ethan. His office was small, cluttered, a stark contrast to Shelley's gleaming corporate fortress. I laid out my story, the printed texts, the casual cruelty. Ethan listened, nodding, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he leaned back in his worn chair. "Frank," he said, his voice level, "Shelley is powerful. She has resources, connections. You should consider accepting your losses. It will be an uphill battle, maybe unwinnable." The courthouse hummed with low voices and the rustle of papers. I sat on a hard bench, waiting for a preliminary hearing on Shelley's restraining order, feeling exposed and vulnerable. That's when I saw her. Sarah, Shelley's assistant. She was usually a blur of efficiency, a silent shadow at Shelley's heels. Today, however, she looked different. Her shoulders were hunched, her face pale, her usual composure replaced by a visible distress. She caught my eye, then quickly looked away. Later, as I stood in the hallway, trying to gather my thoughts before meeting Ethan, Sarah approached me. She moved cautiously, glancing over her shoulder. "Frank," she said, her voice soft, almost a whisper. "I'm so sorry. About everything." I just nodded, unsure how to respond. Her sympathy was unexpected, a rare human touch in the sterile environment of legal proceedings. She twisted her hands, her eyes darting nervously. "Shelley. She's always done this. The affairs, the way she treats people, the corners she cuts. It's been going on for years. Before you even." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "She used me too, Frank, just like she used you. I'm tired of it." My wariness was immediate. Was this a trick? Another one of Shelley's manipulations? But Sarah's distress seemed genuine. Her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and conviction, she continued, speaking quickly, as if afraid to be overheard. "I've been documenting things. For a while now. I couldn't stand it anymore. The way she lied, the way she hurt people." She reached into her pocket, pulling out a small black USB drive. "This is everything. More affairs, financial fraud, client manipulation. She's been siphoning funds, overbilling clients for years, hiding assets. All of it." She pressed the drive into my hand. Her fingers were cold, I have to go. Just be careful, Frank." With that, she turned and hurried away, disappearing into the crowd. I stared at the USB drive, a tiny, innocuous object holding what she claimed was damning evidence. My mind reeled. This wasn't just about my divorce anymore. This was a different kind of darkness altogether. I went straight to Ethan's office, the USB drive burning a hole in my pocket. He listened patiently as I recounted my encounter with Sarah, his expression shifting from skepticism to focused intensity. I handed him the drive. He inserted it into his computer, and for the next hour, we sat in silence as he scrolled, clicked, and downloaded. His usual calm demeanor gave way to sharp gasps and low whistles. The screen displayed meticulous spreadsheets, scanned documents, recorded phone calls, and, yes, more explicit photos and texts, not just with Mitch, but with others. Dates, times, amounts. It was all there. Good God, Frank. Ethan finally muttered, leaning back in his chair, his eyes wide. This is comprehensive. This isn't just about alimony anymore. This is bigger. Much bigger. He ran a hand through his hair, a flicker of excitement in his eyes. This changes everything. A flicker of hope, something I hadn't felt in months, ignited within me. It wasn't a warm, comforting hope, but a cold, hard determination. This wasn't just about getting my life back. This was about justice, not just for me, but for all the others Shelley had used and discarded. For Scout, I started to see a path, not just to survival, but to true retribution. With Sarah's continued, clandestine help, Ethan and I meticulously built our case. She was a goldmine of information, providing access to internal documents, client communication logs, and even more personal details that painted a damning picture of Shelley's long-standing patterns. We spent weeks cross-referencing, verifying, and organizing. Each piece of evidence was a brick in a wall that would eventually crumble Shelley's carefully constructed empire. Our strategy was clear. Hit her where it hurt most. Her reputation, her career, the very foundations of her perceived power. The moment came. We served Shelley with a countersuit. It wasn't just about my divorce anymore. It was a comprehensive document detailing not only the extramarital affairs, but also the financial fraud, the overbilling, the client manipulation Sarah had helped us uncover. The pages were thick with specific dates, names, and damning figures. The news broke in the legal community like a dam bursting. Shelley's firm, a pillar of corporate law, was suddenly under siege. The whispers turned to shouts. Articles in online legal journals began to appear, hinting at the scandal. Clients, many of whom relied on the firm's unblemished reputation, began to distance themselves. I watched from my small apartment, reading the headlines, a strange detachment settling over me. This wasn't about revenge in the petty sense. It was about exposing a truth that had been carefully hidden. Her firm, facing immense public pressure, launched an internal investigation. Shelley, the once unassailable legal eagle, was publicly suspended. Her meticulously crafted image, the one of the brilliant, ethical lawyer, began to crumble. Not slowly, but with the terrifying speed of a landslide. The very people she had cultivated, the clients she had charmed, now saw her for what she was. The calls from her colleagues, once filled with professional respect, turned to accusations. The affair with Mitch, now a public spectacle, also sent shockwaves through his own life. His name, once synonymous with corporate success, was now dragged through the mud alongside Shelley's. His career imploded. His marriage, I heard through Ethan, swiftly followed suit. The collateral damage of Shelley's calculated recklessness spread further than she could have anticipated. Shelley tried to salvage her reputation. She issued carefully worded statements, tried to discredit Sarah, even attempted to paint me as a bitter, vengeful ex-husband. But the evidence, thanks to Sarah's meticulousness, was overwhelming. It was too detailed, too interconnected, too undeniable. Each attempt she made to spin the narrative only dug her deeper. I watched it unfold, not with glee, but with a quiet sense of vindication. There was no joy in seeing someone's life collapse, even if that someone had caused me so much pain. It was simply the inevitable consequence of her actions, laid bare for all to see. The scales, finally, were beginning to balance. In the midst of this storm, something unexpected happened. I started to write again. The dragons and wizards, once hollow, began to stir. The words came more easily, flowing onto the page with a newfound clarity and purpose. My voice, long suppressed, was returning, stronger than before. My confidence, shattered by years of subtle condescension and blatant betrayal, was slowly stitching itself back together. The long, drawn-out legal battle slowly, inexorably, ground towards a resolution, but I knew, deep down, that the real victory had already begun. The legal battle stretched on, a grinding, exhausting process that felt endless. But then, one clear spring morning, Ethan called. "It's done, Frank," he said, his voice carrying a note of triumph. The divorce settlement was finally reached. The terms were far more favorable than I could have ever imagined. I regained a significant portion of the assets, enough to buy a modest house, enough to get back on my feet. The doormat, indeed, had grown a backbone, but the real victory, the one that truly mattered, came a week later. Ethan arranged it. I drove to a park, the one Scout and I used to visit before Shelley. Before everything, Scout was there, held on a leash by a neutral third party. When he saw me, his tail began to thump. Then he broke free, bounding towards me. He jumped, his front paws landing on my chest, his wet nose nudging my chin. I buried my face in his fur, the warm, familiar scent, a balm to my long aching heart. It was a quiet reunion, full of unspoken understanding. A silent promise that some bonds were unbreakable. Shelley's professional life was in ruins. The fraud and client abuses, meticulously documented by Sarah, led to her disbarment. Her name was struck from the legal register, her once glowing career extinguished. The financial penalties were severe, stripping her of the very wealth she had so ruthlessly pursued. Her personal life, too, had shattered. The friends and colleagues who had once fawned over her abandoned her. Mitch was gone, his own life in shambles. The woman who had defined herself by her power and prestige now had neither. I heard she'd moved out of state. A ghost of her former self. I found a small house, not grand, but bathed in natural light, with a fenced yard for Scout. It was modest, but it was mine. I painted the walls a soft cream, bought a comfortable armchair, and set up my desk by a window overlooking a small garden. There, with Scout curled at my feet, I finished my fantasy novel. The words flowed, imbued with a newfound strength and clarity. The hero, once a timid soul, found his courage, faced his dragons, and reclaimed his kingdom. A small publisher, one I'd never dared approach before, picked it up. The novel's success opened unexpected doors. I started teaching creative writing workshops at a local community college. Sharing my passion, seeing the flicker of understanding in a student's eyes, brought a quiet joy I hadn't known was possible. It wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about connection. About building something meaningful. I often thought about the cost of finding my backbone. I had lost everything I thought I had. The grand house, the seemingly perfect wife, the carefully constructed life. But in losing it all, I had gained something far more valuable. Myself. The quiet man who loved stories and dogs, the one Shelley had dismissed, was still there. Now unburdened, whole. The constant erosion of my spirit had stopped. I found peace in this new, authentic life, free from her control, free from the need to pretend. One crisp autumn afternoon, Scout and I walked in the park, the fallen leaves crunching underfoot. The air smelled of wood smoke and damp earth. Scout trotted ahead, chasing a squirrel, his tail wagging furiously. I watched him, a slow smile spreading across my face. The sun was warm on my skin, the world vibrant and alive. I was finally, truly free. The day I found my backbone was the day I lost everything else. Funny how life works that way, isn't it? One minute you're a doormat, the next you're homeless. The bang, getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all began, to the fateful day I met Shelley. It was a crisp autumn morning in Seattle, the kind where the air smells like wet leaves and distant coffee. I was rushing to catch the bus to my job at the public library, where I spent my days cataloging books, and dreaming about writing my own. As I sprinted towards the stop, my threadbare messenger bag slapping against my hip, I saw her. Shelley stood there like a vision in a tailored pantsuit, a sleek briefcase, a stark contrast to my frayed bag. She was tapping away on her phone, probably sending important emails to important people. I, on the other hand, was wheezing like an asthmatic as I stumbled through a stop beside her. "Made it," I gasped, doubling over to catch my breath. She glanced up from her phone, one perfectly shaped eyebrow arching in amusement. "Barely," she said, her voice rich and smooth like expensive coffee. I straightened up, trying to look less like a disheveled librarian and more like, well, I wasn't sure what, but something impressive. "I'm Frank," I said, extending my hand. She looked at it for a moment, as if deciding whether it was worth shaking, before taking it in her own. "Shelley," she replied, "you might want to invest in an alarm clock," and just like that, I was smitten. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs. The way she immediately pointed out a flaw, the subtle condescension in her tone, but I was too busy being dazzled by her confidence, her poise, her take-no-prisoners attitude. The bus ride was a blur of stolen glances and awkward small talk. I learned she worked as a high-powered corporate lawyer, representing tech companies in intellectual property disputes. When I told her about my job at the library, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. At the time, I thought it was interest. Now, I realized it was probably pity. As we got off at our respective stops, I gathered every ounce of courage I possessed. "Would you like to get coffee sometime?" I blurted out, my face burning. Shelley paused, studying me with those sharp eyes of hers. Then, to my utter amazement, she smiled. "Why not? You seem harmless enough." Harmless. That word should have been my second warning. But I was too busy floating on cloud nine to notice the backhanded nature of the compliment. Our first date was at a trendy cafe, where the menu was written entirely in French, and the prices made my wallet weep. Shelley ordered for both of us, dismissing my attempts to decipher the menu with a wave of her hand. "Trust me," she said, flashing that dazzling smile. "I know what's good here," and so began a pattern that would define our entire relationship. Shelley always knew best. Shelley was always in control. And I was just along for the ride, grateful to be in the presence of someone so confident, so assured. We dated for 6 months before she proposed. Yes, you read that right. Shelley proposed to me. It happened during a weekend getaway to a luxurious resort in the Cascades. We were having dinner at the 5-star restaurant, and I was sweating over the wine list, trying to find something that wouldn't bankrupt me. "Oh, for heaven's sake." Shelley sighed, plucking the list from my hands. She ordered a bottle that cost more than my monthly rent, then turned to me with a determined look in her eye. "Frank," she said, reaching across the table to take my hand, "I think we should get married." I blinked, certain I had misheard. "What, married?" she repeated, as if explaining a simple concept to a child. "You and me. It makes sense, doesn't it? We're good together. You're comfortable." There was that word again. Comfortable. Like an old sweater or a well-worn pair of shoes. Not exactly the most romantic description. But I was too shocked to care. But I thought you'd want me to propose," I stammered. Shelley laughed, a sound that was both musical and slightly mocking. "Oh, honey, we both know that if I left it up to you, we'd be waiting forever. Besides, I'm not exactly the type to sit around waiting for a man to make decisions about my life." And just like that, we were engaged. I called my parents that night, giddy with excitement. My mother's response was less than enthusiastic. "Are you sure about this, Frank?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "It all seems so sudden." "I'm sure, Mom," I insisted. "Shelley's amazing. She's smart, successful, beautiful." "And does she make you happy?" my mother pressed. I paused, thrown by the question. "Of course she does," I said, but even I could hear the uncertainty in my voice. The wedding was a lavish affair, planned entirely by Shelley and her army of professionals. I showed up, said my vows, and tried not to faint at the sight of the final bill. Shelley assured me it was an investment in our future, a way to impress her colleagues and clients. After all, she said, as we slow danced at the reception, reception is reality in my world, and I need people to perceive us as successful. I nodded, as I always did when Shelley explained things to me. It made sense, I supposed, even if the thought of starting our marriage in debt made me queasy. Life as Shelley's husband was an adjustment. She convinced me I needed to quit my job at the library. It's not like we need the money. And really, Frank, it's a bit embarrassing, she said, encouraging me to focus on my writing. I was grateful for the opportunity, even if it came with constant critiques of my work. Fantasy? Shelley would say, wrinkling her nose as she glanced at my computer screen. Don't you think you should write something more substantial, like a legal thriller? I could give you some insider knowledge. I'd smile and nod, then go back to my dragons and wizards when she left for work. It was easier that way, avoiding conflict. Shelley had strong opinions about everything, and I found it simpler to just go along with what she wanted. Our social life revolved entirely around Shelley's work colleagues and clients. Dinner parties became a regular occurrence, with me playing the role of the quiet, supportive husband. I'd stand in the corner, nursing a glass of wine I couldn't pronounce, while Shelley worked the room. It was at one of these parties that I first noticed the way Shelley talked about me to others. We were in a group with some of her co-workers, discussing recent vacations. Frank and I just got back from Bali, Shelley said, her hand resting possessively on my arm. It was lovely, wasn't it, dear? I nodded, opening my mouth to share my favorite part of the trip, a beautiful temple we visited. But Shelley steamrolled right over me. Of course, Frank got the most awful sunburn. I told him to wear sunscreen, but you know how men are. She laughed, and the others joined in. He spent half the trip looking like a lobster. It was pretty pathetic. I felt my face flush, matching the sunburn she'd just described. It wasn't a huge deal, I told myself. Just a little joke. But as the night went on, I noticed more and more of these little jabs. Oh, don't ask Frank about the stock market. He still thinks a bull market has something to do with farming. You should have seen him trying to order in French when we were in Paris. The waiter thought he was having a stroke. Each comment was delivered with a laugh and a squeeze on my arm, as if to say, "Isn't he adorable?" But I didn't feel adorable. I felt small, insignificant, like a pet being shown off at a party. As we drove home that night, I finally worked up the courage to say something. "Hey, Shelley, do you think maybe you could turn it down a bit with the jokes about me at the parties, I mean?" Shelley glanced at me, surprise evident on her face. "What are you talking about?" "You know, the comments about me being stupid or incompetent. It's kind of embarrassing." She laughed, reaching over to pat my knee. "Oh, honey, I'm just teasing. Everyone knows it's all good fun. You're not going to be one of those oversensitive men who can't take a joke, are you?" And just like that, I was back in my place. Of course I wasn't going to be oversensitive. Of course I could take a joke. Even if the joke was always at my expense, this became my new normal. In public, I was the bumbling husband, good for a laugh, but not much else. In private, I was the sounding board for Shelley's frustrations, the target for her sharp tongue when work stressed her out, or things didn't go her way. God. Frank, do you have to breathe so loudly? I'm trying to concentrate here. Seriously, that's what you're wearing to dinner? Do I have to dress you like a child? I swear, sometimes I think the dog is smarter than you are. Each comment chipped away at my self-esteem, but I told myself it was fine. Relationships take work, right? And Shelley was under a lot of stress. She didn't really mean the things she said. At least that's what I kept telling myself. Years passed in this fashion. I retreated further into my writing, creating worlds where I was the hero, where my opinions mattered. Shelley's career soared, bringing with it more money, more prestige, and more stress. The cracks in our relationship widened, but I did my best to paper over them with smiles and acquiescence. Then came the night that changed everything. It was another one of Shelley's dinner parties. The usual crowd was there. Lawyers, executives, a few clients she was trying to impress. I was in my usual spot, nursing a glass of wine and trying to blend into the wallpaper. Shelley was holding court in the living room, regaling everyone with a story about her latest courtroom victory. I wasn't really listening until I heard my name, and then Frank, blessed his heart, trying to help me prepare for the case. You should have seen him stumbling over the legal jargon like a dog trying to recite Shakespeare. The room erupted in laughter. I felt my face grow hot, but I forced a smile. Just another joke, I told myself. Don't be oversensitive. But Shelley wasn't done. I swear, sometimes I think I'm married to a golden retriever instead of a man, always eager to please. Not the brightest bulb, but loyal to a fault. Isn't that right, Frank? More laughter. I looked around the room.